All right, so thanks everybody for filling out your thing. This is a pretty nice treat. Welcome back. Today we're going to continue on what we kind of just jammed on the end of last class. You know, in retrospect, it might have been wise to stop before the templating and review some other concepts because it kind of got lost in the fray of the end of the class. But we're gonna, don't worry, we're gonna go back through that material today and actually put it into practice. And hopefully that will make a lot more sense after that. We're going to continue building out our to-do application, this time as a full MVC application that does more than just adding to-dos. Maybe we'll have it so you can complete them and delete them and things of that nature. Just by the way, to-do application is sort of like the model application for introducing a new framework or new architecture. You'll see online, anytime like a new framework comes out, it's like Angular or something like that, they'll say, to-do Angular, and they'll make an example application as a to-do application. So, this is, sort of a way that almost everything is introduced is through this sort of to-do application. It's also a good way of like benchmarking performance and things of that nature. So just a little tidbit there. After we finish up talking about MVC stuff, we're going to augment our app a bit by talking about this word here, AJAX. And what that really means is how does our front-end application communicate with back-end applications, right? So we're really going to start tying this into, a back-end server of some sort, and the process by which we will do that is using this thing called AJAX. So we'll talk about what that means and how to use it on the latter half of the class. Okay, so again, some agenda, starting with the templating and finishing up MVC, and then going on to AJAX and HTTP as a concept in total. I don't have a slide here, but we are going to do a quick review quiz. So go to Slack if you would. And I've made a few small improvements, so hopefully today will work a little better than last time. But we'll find out. I kind of did it really late last night, so maybe there's a bug, but we'll find out. I'm actually going to make a quiz channel, and I'm going to invite everyone somehow. Yes. So open Slack and prepare for quiz action. Should have done this ahead of time. Okay, here it comes. Everybody should have just gotten a invite to quiz channel. You see that? All right, so I just don't want to clutter up the general channel. I feel like the quiz kind of cluttered it up a bit, so we're going to do it here. Let me just make sure this is working. Okay, we're going to start the quiz. Once again, how this works is Quizzical is the name of the bot. It's going to just show the first question here. You're going to direct message Quizzical in order to answer the question by just typing in the multiple choice thing, letter. And this time I have the ability to nag you if you don't actually do it. So here's the first question.
Remember, message it.
You can click this link here, or you can open up a thing there. So the first question, which of the following is not an event we can listen for in JavaScript?
I want to test this nagging feature.
Well, I can't do it for the first one. It happens for all the subsequent ones, because the first one is how it tells who's actually participating. So has everybody gotten their answer? So anybody still working? Give you another second. Oh, I just realized I'm recording my face instead of the screen. Yes.
I mean, it's a lovely face and all, but.
So make sure to direct message. Exactly. Thank you, Herschel. All right, here we go. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question now. So Quizzical next. All right, so now you should receive a DM from Quizzical with the next question. What is an event listener or handler? Oh, everybody got the first one right. Well done. All right. So now if I do Quizzical next, it should nag the people who haven't finished yet. So somebody get a message just now? There we go. It worked. All right, so how many event listeners can be attached to a single DOM element? All right, we're still waiting on one person, looks like. Make sure to answer in the, okay, there we go. Everybody got that one too. Okay, question 4. When an event bubbles, how far up the DOM tree does it travel? We are working in the quiz channel. It won't let you join halfway through, but you can, follow along and, note your answers. Maybe I should build that feature from Tuesday. What's that?
I thought we were in questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can join it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, nice. Wow, good. I already did that, apparently.
I actually thought we were past it.
Totally by accident, but here we go. So what strategy could we use to listen for events on dynamic HTML elements that are not present when the page first loads? We'll get the hang. It's a strange user experience. I will give you that. Going back and forth between channels. Oh wow! I'm not going to tell you. We'll find out.
That's some of the question to you personally as well.
Yeah, it does. The idea was like maybe you would just hang out in that channel once you start the DM, but clearly it's not quite as straightforward as I thought it might be. I've got to think about this. Need to do some user research. All right, question 6. What does this represent in the following code? What does the word this represent in the following code? Man, we're killing it today, though. Collectively.
The moment of suspense, once you answer it, it doesn't show if you got it right unless you scroll up.
Oh, really? Oh, right, because yeah, makes sense. Or I'm going to bug people. Oh, never mind. Question 7, what is not a reason for separation of concerns design pattern? What is not a reason or justification for separation of concerns as a design pattern? This one I probably didn't mention explicitly, but maybe you have to sort of think about it. So we're going to turn this into Mean Girls memes. I like it.
Does it refer to using uncoded one file or
In general. I think this is the last one. Oh, never mind. One more. What is the concern of the model in an MVC architecture? So what is the concern of the model in an MVC architecture? This is the last one, I'm sure of it. Okay. All right. So that last one was harder. So let's go back through this. I'll spend more time on the questions that had less favorable outcomes. All right. So here we are. So what is a no? Here we go. What is this? Which of the following is not an event we can listen for in JavaScript? A click, scroll, key press, window resize. Well, these are all valid events that we can listen for in the browser. It seems like everybody remembered that. We went over a bunch of them last class, and these are 4 from that larger set of things we can listen for. We also talked about things like focus and blur and mouse over, which we sometimes call hover, and mouse enter and mouse out, and all of those things. On load, page unload. Those are all events that we can listen to in JavaScript. And everybody got that right, so I'm not going to dwell. What is an event listener or handler? most people got this right. An event listener or handler is the function that responds to an event, right? So it's the function that responds to that event. So when we use jQuery's .on method, what we're doing is setting up an event listener whose job it is to respond to some event, right? So the listener itself is the function, and that's how we'll refer to it, as an event listener. Just a special type of function that we use for this scenario where we need to react to an event. Okay, how many event listeners can be attached to a single DOM node? Everybody got this right. I often say this: there are no arbitrary limits in JavaScript or in programming languages in general. No arbitrary limits, right? In fact, there's no, for all intents and purposes, limit to how many things can be attached to a single DOM node. Yes.
This one, I was thinking, what if you put two events like on click, and you put two events could happen that could click with each other on one object?
So you're saying, like, say I attach one listener on click that turns the color blue, and then I attach another click listener on with the .on that turns the color red.
Yeah.
Right. So it depends on the order that we attach them. So when we attach the first one and then the second one, when that click happens, the first one will run first, then the second one. Okay. So what it does is it creates a list of event listeners, and then it runs each event listener that's attached on that DOM node. So the order that they get attached, the order that .on is called, is what determines when the last thing is run. But both of them will always run. Yes, we won't see the first one because it'll get immediately counteracted by the second one. But yes, question.
So in that case, like one is in the JS file and one's like say the HTML on the head. The head one will probably be the last one. Okay.
So it depends on not necessarily, because it depends on where you're loading your script tag for your JS file, right? So if your script tag for your JS file comes after the script block where you attach your first listener, then the script head in the head will run first, and then your script tag, like say before the closing body, will run second. If you switch those, right, then the one in the head will run first, and the one down here will run second. So things that are loaded in the head would be attached before things that are loaded be before the closing body tag. Yeah. Cool. Any more questions about this? Awesome. Okay, so let's look at this next one. When an event bubbles, how far up the DOM tree does it go? Well, most people got this right with A, which is all the way, right? If we do something really deep down in the DOM tree, we click it, but it's going to go all the way up until it gets to the HTML. The second most common answer was to the element's direct parent. Well, it does go to the element's direct parent, but it doesn't stop there, right? It's going to go all the way up the tree, and we can listen for it at any point in that DOM tree above it. Any questions about that one? Okay, the next one. What strategy could we use to listen for dynamic HTML elements that are not present when the page first loads? Well, everybody got this right. Any of these strategies could work, right? We could use what we call a delegated event listener, which is a listener we attach to a parent to listen for events that happen on its children, right? This is probably the best solution for this answer. So if I had to change this question and say, which is the best solution to this problem, A would probably be the correct answer for that. Because it's a strategy that works, and you have to write one line of code there, and you're done. It also doesn't create a bunch of different event listeners. It has just that one there. And so that's a good strategy, and the one we'll probably use 90% of the time for listening for dynamic element events. However, as we talked about last class, we could also attach event listeners when those new dynamic elements appear. So if we're going to add a list item and we want to listen for events on it, when we add that list item, we can also right there attach an event listener to it. Now that's slightly less ideal than the other situation because we're going to be creating a new event listener for each of these new elements that's added. And it's also more code. So this is probably still a better approach, even though both will work. Finally, we could just get rid of the dynamic nature of those elements altogether by having them there when the page loads, but maybe we just use CSS to hide them until our JavaScript changes some CSS property to reveal that they're actually there. Right? And if they're there, even if they're hidden, we can attach an event listener when the page loads. So any of these three strategies could potentially work, but we're probably going to use A most often. Any questions about that? Cool. So does anybody remember how we can tell the difference between, just by looking at code, between a regular event listener and a delegated event listener? You're nodding, shaking, nodding, nodding.
In the middle of the two, the like object and like what you do with it with the child.
Right, exactly. The way we can tell the difference between a regular event listener, a directly bound event listener, and a delegated event listener is because delegated event listeners .on takes 3 arguments, right? The first being the event itself, click, say. The second being the CSS selector for the child that we care about. And the third being our event listener function, right? So when we see those 3 things, we know it's a delegated event listener rather than a directly bound event listener. Cool. All right. Next one here. What does this represent in the following code? So I mentioned last class that this is actually a pretty complex concept in JavaScript, one that we'll spend almost an entire class on in 2 weeks. But you know, in jQuery land, it has a very specific meaning, and one that's a little bit easier to understand. In that case, it's the element, the DOM element, that the event occurred on, right? So in other words, for this one here, when we have this mouse over on all of the buttons on the page, inside of the event listener function here, this is referring to the element that was moused over, right? To the element that was hovered over. So this here is that specific button, not every button on the page, right? Which could be valuable to us because a lot of times when an event occurs on a specific thing, we want to change the CSS or something else about that specific button and not all the buttons on the page. So we're going to end up using this in jQuery quite frequently. Any questions about this? Okay, rocking and rolling. Okay, what is not a reason for separation of concerns design pattern? Now, I wasn't really explicit about this, so if you figure it out, that's great. But I'll explain a little bit more. So the correct answer here was A. It significantly reduces the amount of code. That's not really a justification for MVC. In fact, many times it'll increase the amount of code. The goal is to increase the clarity of the code, right? And to increase the productivity of the developer working on the code by reducing the number of things that are happening in one section, keeping it organized. It's an organizational structure more than anything. And so it makes our code easier to reason about. That's probably the primary reason for MVC. Also, it helps our applications grow from small, simple applications like To-Do to something very complex, like, say, Facebook, right? Or Gmail, something of that nature. These same design patterns can be used to implement those large applications that have very complex state and things of that nature. And once again, we've seen it can work for a small application. If it allows something to scale, it can work for large applications. So those 3 things there are pretty accurate. Whereas A is not really a justification. In some situations, it may reduce the amount of code, but in others, it's just as likely to increase the amount of code. That's not really the goal. The goal is to increase the clarity of the code.
Our battery's pretty low.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Forgot to plug in. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So what is the concern of the model in MVC architecture? So we just kind of briefly went through what each of the letters in MVC stands for: model, view, and controller, right? And when talking about the model, what we're talking about is code that is representing our application state. So In the case of a to-do application, it's, you know, the individual to-do items, right, are part of the model, the state of the application. We talked about briefly that the view's job is to take that state and turn it into HTML, right, or to render the state so that the user can see it. And finally, the controller is how you communicate between your view and your model, most typically. And the controller's job is to do things like listen for events and respond to them and update the model. So we will look at that more closely in a second. Are there any more questions before we move on about anything? Okay, great. What do you think about the quiz this time? A little better? Yeah, sweet. We'll keep improving it as we go. All right. Okay, so let's talk about templating again. I'm going to introduce the concept one more time because it's not immediately obvious as to what it's used for. And the way I'm going to introduce it this time is by looking at some websites and seeing how these websites are using templating, right? And you know, it turns out that most websites we go to are using templating in some form. Not all of it happens in JavaScript on the front end. In fact, probably most of it happens on the back end templating. That's how like WordPress works, for instance. You create templates in PHP and it fills in the dynamic blog content, for instance. That's why every page looks about the same, but the text is different, right? So that's the general idea behind templating, is creating this sort of skeleton for a web page without the actual content that goes inside, with placeholders for the content. So let's look at some examples. So this is GitHub, a site you're probably pretty familiar with. I'm going to look at the profile. So if you look at your profile, right, the profile looks very much the same here. Right? All the styles and sort of layout is the same for everybody, but the actual content in there is different, right? So what things here do you think are dynamic? Right? Can we name some things here that are dynamic on this page? Yeah. Yeah, my photo, obviously, everybody's going to have a different photo. So inside the template, there is a dynamic placeholder for a profile image of some sort. Yeah. This thing? Yeah, the data here in this graph of contributions over time, right? That's going to be different for everybody. But the graph basically looks the same. So maybe you can imagine each one of these is like a table cell, and the different colors are represented by maybe different classes, CSS classes or something like that. And the template is responsible for taking some JavaScript data and turning it into HTML classes, things of that nature, in order to give it the specific appearance for my profile. What else on here is dynamic? Yeah. Right, the repository names. So you can imagine that there is an array of repositories that I've contributed to somewhere in the application state, and this template fills in those individual repositories with both the name and probably a link to wherever that thing is, right? So what things here are not part of the template, not dynamic? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for the most part, other than maybe my little picture in the upper right-hand corner, for the most part, that top menu bar is going to look the same for everybody, right? So that part is probably, you know, in the template, you know, statically coded rather than having these dynamic placeholders things. Right, so if you look at this, like most of it is the same, the structure, the styles, all of that is the same, and then there's just pieces of dynamic content that are going to change for each user. So rather than writing HTML pages with everything typed out for every user, we're going to use some sort of templating to fill in that dynamic content. Just look at a couple more. So, you know, similar vein, the General Assembly like course pages, right? They all follow a very similar structure. In fact, they all have this overview, learning support, curriculum, instructors, right? And the structure of the page, the styles, all those things are consistent from course to course. But what changes is the pictures of the instructors, right? The names of the instructors. So inside of this template, there are dynamic placeholders for individual instructors, right? For the actual course syllabus or course overview. Those things are dynamic, whereas like this sidebar here, right? This is the same on every page. So this is not, this is, you know, in the template, this is not dynamic, right? Oh no. I did it again.
Only twice this
Mhm.
entire class though.
That's pretty good because I used to do it at least once a class. I moved too much. All right, let me fix the stream. Okay. And again, we'll look at Stack Overflow. So you've probably found yourself on Stack Overflow at least once so far. If not, you're really missing out. It's a great resource to find, you know, answers to common bugs or problems. And you'll notice, and you probably have noticed that, well, it's probably not good to go to a recent one. Let me go to like, here we go. They follow a similar format, right? There's a question posed at the top. There's this up arrow, down arrow with the number of how many people have, you know, clicked those things. And then below it, there are a list of answers. One of those is going to have the green check mark, right, saying this is like the accepted answer for this question. And, you know, whereas the content here is changing per question, the template remains the same, right? They all, you know, have the same structure. They all have, the comments have a similar structure. And all of these things are pretty consistent across the thing. It's how they, you know, create this consistent look throughout the website. So that, you know, is at the root of it is the goal of templating, right? We want to create consistent and reusable HTML where we can fill in dynamic content as needed. Okay. Let's go back to the slides here. So specifically when we're templating with JavaScript, there are a few options we can use as far as templating libraries go. These are three of the most popular. I mentioned this last class: handlebars, mustache, underscore templates. You know, for our purposes, we're just going to use handlebars, but they more or less all work basically the same. I mean, the syntax might be slightly different, but they all work essentially the same way. So last class we added this script tag to our HTML file. You know, we're just going to pull in this library in the same way that we pulled in jQuery. Right? So it's just another library with functionality that we can use to enhance our projects. And you know, this is the way we'll do it. Another thing we could do, right? We could go and download the file, put it in our JS folder, and then include it that way, like we do for our index.js file. We could do it that way. But you know, since they're providing this, you know, hosted version, as we'll call it, a version that's already online, we'll just use that rather than putting it in our project. It's a little bit easier for us. There's a third way we could do this in the future. We'll talk about using npm to install libraries and things like that for the front end, which is different than how we use npm on the back end. Okay, so let's walk through this process of creating a template. This time we're going to take it one step at a time, and then we're going to refer to our application, our to-do application, start working on the template for that, one step at a time. So the first thing I'll do is, if you were here last class and you follow along and you have the boilerplate to-do MVC already set up in your code from last class with the script tag in there, use that because it's just easier. If not, you're going to need to get the starter code for this class, which has a version that's already up to date. So if you were not here last class, we'll go ahead and quickly do this. I'm going to cd to get to the home directory. I'm going to cd into documents where I keep my code. I'm going to cd into JS-DC2, and I'm going to git pull to get the latest updates. Once again, if you were here last class and you already have the to-do MVC folder, just work in there. I mean, we're just going to continue right where we left off. But if you weren't here last class, you can go ahead and get the version from here. So now that I've pulled, I'm going to cd up one level to back to documents, cd dot dot. I'm then going to make a directory in Jacob's JS repo class 09. And then I'm going to copy recursively -r from JS-EC2 09. Well, that's weird. MVC and AJAX starter code. So I'm going to copy the starter code folder into Jacob's JS repo class 09. And then I'm going to cd into there, class 09, starter code, and finally just open that up in Sublime. Okay?
So we're copying from class folder.
Yes. If you were not here last class, you don't already have it set up. If you already have it from last class, you don't need to worry about it. You can just use what we were started on last class. It's the same thing. Okay, so we're working in here in this to-do MVC, and this is how far we got last class. Basically, all we did was we added this handlebars JavaScript tag right here. Right? So here's jQuery. We added handlebars, and then just below that we have our index.js, which is the file that we're going to work in. Okay, everybody got this? Anybody still setting up? Okay. All right, I'm going to flip back to the slides, and then we'll come back, and we're going to implement this template one step at a time. Okay? First step being create the template. Okay? So here's a little bit. This is not the one we're creating, but this is an example of a template. Right? We do it inside of a script tag, but we're going to give that script tag an ID so that we can reference it in our JavaScript more easily. And we're also going to give that script tag a special type that tells the browser that it's being used for handlebars as a handlebars template. Okay. Normally we would see this say text/JavaScript, right, inside of a script tag, but here it's not actually JavaScript. It's a handlebars template. Okay, and this version, this template here that we've created as a demo has two pieces of dynamic content. Right? It has a hello title and it has hello content. The hello title is inside of an H1, a heading 1, and the hello content is inside of a paragraph. So ours is going to be, not too much different. So let's turn back to Sublime, and we're going to create the template in our HTML. Okay, so it's inside the HTML, inside of a script tag. Okay, and I'm just going to put that script tag right here below the rest of my script tags. So I'll create a script tag, and my Sublime filled that in for me, but we know that's not right. It's going to be x-handlebars-template. And we also need to give this thing an ID so that we can refer to it in our JavaScript. And I'm going to give it the ID to-do template. Okay, so we've created the script tag with two attributes. The first, text type, text, x handlebars template. The second, ID to-do template. Okay. All right, so now we need to actually create our template. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the template for a single list item. Okay, so we're just going to make a template for a single list item in our list of to-do items. So the way we'll do that is just by creating what looks like a list item. So we'll use an open li tag and a close li tag. And then inside of there, we need a placeholder for the dynamic content, the content that's added by the user as the application progresses. And we do that with these double curly braces. Everybody see this font size okay? Let me add some space at the bottom. So these double curly braces, and then we have to give it a name. So I'm just going to call it text. Keep it simple. Oh, no, I didn't even unplug it that time. Stay away. Okay, so now we have our template. Let's go back to the slide and see what's the next step. Okay, the next step is we got to reference the template in our JavaScript, and we need to compile that template in order to use it. Okay, so what does compiling mean? It means taking the HTML that's inside of that script tag and turning it into a JavaScript function. Okay, so we're taking that template and we're transforming it into a JavaScript function. The job of that function that is created by compiling it is to then take our model data and turn it into HTML. Okay, so the template function is, performing the vital sort of function of our view component, right? Which is to take JavaScript data and turn it into HTML. All right, so let's go back to Sublime, and we're going to go into our index. Actually, we did this last class as well, but we'll just go ahead and review this. We created a model for our application, right? A way to store the state of our application, and we decided that a good model for this application was a list of strings, right? So a to-do list is just a list of strings. And so how do we make a list of strings? Well, we do that by using an array. And we're going to go ahead and start it off with just two things, two strings in there, hello and world. Okay, so this is a very simple model, but this is the model for our application so far. All right. So the next thing we need to do is we need to work on our view. So I'm going to create sort of a new comment there for me to keep myself organized. Okay, so our view needs to do two things, right? First thing we need to do is to reference that template that's in the HTML, and then we need to compile it. So we're going to reference it by doing this. We'll just call this variable, create a variable here called source. And how are we going to reference it? Anybody have an idea how we can reference a script tag? Yeah. Right. We created this ID just for this purpose. And what thing that we've used so far to take an ID and go find something in the HTML? Right, exactly. So we can use jQuery in combination with a ID CSS selector to go find that template on our page. And the ID that we gave it was to-dos template. Okay, so we've used jQuery to go into our HTML and select the element that has an ID of to-dos template, and that happens to be our template. Okay. Well, we want something specific from this template, and the thing we want from it is the HTML that's inside of it, right? Or the text that's inside of it. So we're going to use the jQuery HTML function in order to retrieve the HTML that's inside of that template. So just as a reminder, we've talked about a couple times how most of the, or many of these jQuery functions that we use can be used multiple ways. And most commonly, the two ways that it can be used is to either get a value or to set a value. This HTML function here that we're using can be used, if we use with no parameters, is used to get the value in that script tag, which is what we're doing here. If we were to put an argument in here, something like this, right, that would set the HTML inside of that script tag. Okay, so those are two different functions. Without an argument, it gets the value. With an argument, it sets the value. Well, what we want here is to get the value and to store it in this variable. So we're going to leave the arguments blank. Okay. The next step is for us to take that source, that HTML source, and to turn it into a template function. And the way we do that is by using handlebars compile. We'll create a new variable here called template. And inside of that, we're going to store our function that is created by calling handlebars.compile and passing that the source. Okay. So this handlebars, capital handlebars, that exists because we have that handlebars script loaded before this. Okay, so when we add that handlebars script before our script, we get access to this global handlebars variable. Just like when we add the jQuery script before our script, we get access to this global $sign variable there. Yes?
So the template right now is just text. It's just the variable text, right?
This is text.
Right.
The source is text. It's the text that we get outside from inside of that template. Template here is a function. Okay, so handlebars compile takes that source and turns it into a JavaScript function, and we stored that function inside of template.
Okay, but the function right now is just that one variable, right?
Yeah, the function right now is just stored right here. And are you talking about that text variable?
Yeah,
That's,
like I'm talking about like whatever you pass into handlebars right now is just that one variable.
correct, because we have only defined one piece of dynamic content. Yeah, that's correct.
So I guess I'm just wondering what the function actually is when you pass it
Well,
into the variable.
If you think about it, all it's doing is it's taking in an object, and we'll see what that looks like, and it's turning it into an LI. So that's what the function is doing. It creates an LI that we can then place into HTML. Yeah, another question?
You had S222.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll change this one.
Yeah.
To do template, yeah. Thank you, good catch. Okay. All right, so let's turn back to the slides. We'll kind of finish off this process here. So now that we've compiled the template into a JavaScript function, the next thing we have to do is we need to pass an object to that function that will get rendered into HTML. Okay. And the important thing to note here is that the keys in this object line up, they match one-to-one with those dynamic placeholders that we put in the template.
So they don't right now.
Well, right now they don't. Yeah. So we'll have to mitigate against that, but we'll see how to do that. So again, this hello title here matches hello title in these curly braces inside of the template. So inside of the object, it's going to match the keys. Have to match these dynamic content pieces. Okay. So yeah, like was pointed out, we obviously have an issue here because we have an array right now, and we actually need an object that has a text key, right? That's what we need in order to put it into this template. So let's look back at our JavaScript. All right. So remember, the template that we've created is a single list item. Okay? Our state is a list, an array of potential list items, right? So we need to take that array and we need to create a list item for each thing in that array. So what strategy, what control flow structure can we use to render this template once for each thing in that array? What control flow structure can we use to create one for each thing in this array? Somebody from I haven't heard from yet. Yeah. Yeah. Well, more generally, we can use a loop, right, of some sort. Yes, we could use a for each loop. We could use a for loop. We could use a while loop. Really, it's up to us which one we use. I'm going to just go ahead and use a for loop because, that's what I feel like right now. So I'm going to create a for loop. Remember, a for loop or loops in general are a way to create repetitive code that needs to repeat more than one time. It's also a perfect way to iterate through an array. Okay, so when you have an array of values and we need to do something for each thing inside of there, we do what's called iterating through that array, and that's exactly what we need to do right now. So I'm going to create a for loop, and at the beginning of that for loop, I'm going to create this variable I and set it equal to 0. I'm going to continue looping as long as I is less than the length of my to-dos. Right? So I know the last index is 1 less than the length, so I can keep going as long as the I is less than the length. And then at the end of each loop, I'm going to just increment by 1. Okay. Now that we're inside of this loop, what I need to do is I need to create an object that we can put into that template so that we can start rendering HTML. So the way I'm going to do that is this. I'm going to create a variable here called to-do. Inside of that variable, I'm going to store a JavaScript object. Okay. All right. Now, what keys does this object need to have?
Correct.
Yes, it needs to have a key text. And why is that? Someone else. Why does it need a text key in this object? Yeah.
Because our array has text keys.
Close, but not exactly. As strings as values.
Or a string, right?
Text and strings, I mean, they're not necessarily interchangeable. Text is like a word that we use in English. String is a value in JavaScript.
You could definitely used text inside your curly brackets.
Exactly. The reason it needs to have a key text is because inside of our template, we've used text inside of these double curly braces. Okay, so the keys of the object have to match up exactly with these things inside of the curly braces inside of our template. Okay, so that's why we need a key text inside of there. And so let's do that. Put a key, oh, not text, text. And what should the value of that text be? Yeah. Go ahead. Exactly. So what we need to do is we're inside of this loop, right? We need to find the ith thing, right? The thing at index I inside of our state model array up here. So our to-dos array up here, we're going to iterate through it. The first time, we're going to get the thing at index 0. The second time, we'll get the thing at index 1. If we go longer, we'll get this thing at index 2, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're going to type in the name of that array, to-dos, and we're going to access the thing that's at index I. I being a variable that will change in each iteration of the loop. Okay. All right, so now we have the object that we need to pass to the template function. How do we call the template function in order to actually do the passing? So how do we call that function? Yeah. Okay, we could return it like this. Is that what you're saying? Simply? Okay, return to do or something. Okay, there's a reason that this won't work. Well, a couple, but the first reason is we can only use return inside of a function. So that's the first thing. We can only use return inside of a function. We're not inside of a function here, so we can't do that. Any other guesses of how we can call the template function? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say call source.
Okay, source. So source, remember, is the the HTML content that we got outside of the template, it's a string. So we can't call a string.
Or the call template.
Call template, exactly, right? So template, remember, is a variable, but we know the value inside of that variable is a function, right? Because handlebars compile creates a function. So template is a function, which means we can use parentheses to call it. Okay. So we need to pass something to this function. Well, the thing that we're going to pass to the function is the object we just created that has the appropriate keys. Okay, so it has the appropriate text key, and we just created it for this very purpose. So we're going to pass it that object. Okay. So when we call this template function and pass it the object, the result is going to be an HTML string. Okay? An HTML string that now has the dynamic content filled in. Okay? So now instead of saying li double curly braces text, it's going to say li hello close li, for instance. Okay? So now that we are creating this HTML string, what else do we need to do here on line 17? Yeah. Right. And where might we put it?
In the UL, the
Yeah, we could totally do that. So we could do it, we could directly take this string here and put it right inside of the to-do list UL. We could also just, for the meantime, store it in a variable. I'll call it to-do list item. So now we have that HTML string, and then on the next line, I'll go ahead and place it in there. And we could do this all in one line if we wanted to.
Is there like a standard link to kind of consolidate all the data and then pop it into the HTML again? Or is it
It really depends. It depends on how many operations you're doing, how many function calls are there. Is it clear and readable? Really, is the sort of bottom line. If you look at that and you say it's very clear what's happening on this one line, that's good. If it seems like there's too much happening in one line, break it up over 2 lines and use a variable to store the intermediate value like this.
But it would never affect loading the computer, never
No. It has almost no performance implications. So we're going to need to, let's look at our HTML. We have this UL here with the ID to-do list. That's where we want to place our LIs, right? So we're going to use jQuery to find this UL, and then we're going to add our newly generated HTML string. Okay? So we know how to find something by the ID. We just use the hashtag for ID, and I believe, what was it? I've already forgotten. To-do dash list? Oh, to-do list camel face. Interesting. Okay, so we found this to-do list by its ID. And what can we use, what jQuery function can we use to put that HTML string to-do list item in there? Yeah, append. Yeah, why append? Okay, why not use like HTML? Exactly. So remember, this is a for loop. We're going to be running this once for each thing in here. If we use .html, we're going to replace all of the HTML inside of there each time the loop runs. So at the end of this loop, all we'll see is the last to-do list item in that UL. What we want instead is to append each one after the other, so we don't overwrite all of the HTML at once. Okay, so that's why we have to use append here. Append to-do list item. All right. Let's go ahead and save this and run it and see what happens. So I'm going to go over to this index.html, and I'm going to open it in the browser. And we see nothing. So I've obviously made a mistake.
Unexpected.
To do template. ID.
Yeah, my JavaScript, the script type with the handlebars template is a different color from all the other script types.
This one?
Yeah.
All right.
This looks a lot like the problem we were having last night when we were trying to do it.
Yeah, it's weird. It must be a typo that I'm prone to. All right, well, it's 7:30, so let's take a break while I debug this. When we come back, I'll explain all about why it happened. I know exactly why it's happening. There's the issue.
What was it?
Document ready.
I had a document right for the dog.
You added it to this one just now?
No, I already had it in.
That's strange. Maybe Slack me your code and I'll look at it. I'll just paste it in.
They're not.
I can see that.
But it's like, why are you wearing a belly? That's in Arizona.
Yeah, so I know, like, I was going on the board, like, 100% in I have to stop spinning. Yeah. It's fun now.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah, it's not like I already had my code.
I mean, there's nothing obviously wrong here. I mean, the only thing I can think about is Are you using the same version of handlebars that we are? Like,
I think I copied it.
yeah,
4.05.
yeah.
Are you calling handlebars before or after the JavaScript?
I put mine before. You should put it before.
And just walk around. Well, yeah, that's like going back to school.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Wait. It's like I have an unexpected string in my array on 4.
Oh, okay, yeah. In your to-dos, you're missing a comma after hello.
Crap. How noobish is that?
Happens to everyone. In fact, it happened to me today.
But, you know,
What's the error now?
unexpected tokens.
Say you gotta move your test, your JS file really on script.
Oh, it didn't want to.
Yes, yeah. So I'm going to talk about why.
Okay. There's that problem. Still another problem. Actually, I didn't get
Okay.
any console errors. I just not blend it right.
So did anybody figure this out during the break?
I mean, I did.
Anybody else?
Anybody else was
Yeah. Okay, so the issue here. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. It's so bright in here. Sorry. This one. Is that better? So the issue here is that at the time when our JavaScript is running, the entire HTML page isn't quite ready yet. Does anybody remember how we fixed that problem? There's a special event that happens that we can use jQuery to listen for. Yeah? Exactly, yes. We need to wait for the document to be ready before we start running our JavaScript. And this is a real reason why. When we try to do this, the template isn't there yet. It's not ready to go yet. And so when we run this code, our template is just empty and nothing's going to happen. So what we need to do is we need to refactor our code a little bit such that it's inside of a document ready call. Okay? So let's do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this code and I'm going to put it inside of a function. And I'm going to call this function render to-dos. Okay? This function's job is to take our application state and turn it into HTML and then place it on the page. Yes?
Wait, so mine's still not working. Should I just go forward with a non-working?
I mean, I can help you debug. We're gonna have like opportunities to like work on your own. And I can help you debug at that point. Yeah, I don't.
Just move the JS file.
Yeah, so totally you could move the JS file after the template, your index.js file after the template, which will work, but we would call that a brittle solution, right? It's a brittle solution. Yeah, well, maybe, I don't know. He has a document ready in there, so I'm not sure if that's the issue or not. But the reason it's brittle or easy to break is because if another developer comes in and adds another script tag, afterwards or rearranges things, all of a sudden things will stop working. So it's better to just, be sure and use document ready instead to make sure that everything's good to go. Then it doesn't matter where we load this file. We're always sure that the document is ready. Okay, so we've created this function, render to-dos. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function called setup, like we had in our original to-do application. I'm going to create another function here called setup, and it's just going to, for now, it's just going to do one thing. It's going to render those to-dos. Later, we'll do probably some more stuff, but for now, it's just going to render those to-dos. Okay? Yeah, question?
So then do we have to put all the code we write into functions? And put those functions into that?
Exactly. Because any code that's not inside of functions is going to run as soon as this file loads. And so if any of that code interacts with the DOM, right, needs to change things or use the DOM in some way, it has a potential to fail if the document isn't ready, if the DOM isn't ready to be used. Okay? So anything that is going to interact with the DOM necessarily needs to be inside of the document ready. Okay? Yeah, question?
When would the DOM not be ready before the page loads completely?
Okay, for instance, if we put this index.js in the head instead of putting it at the end of the body, then when this file loads, none of the body will have loaded yet.
This is like second place.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sub-second. Yeah, I mean, it's very, very fast. And if it's not there when the script starts to load, it's just going to throw an error and nothing will happen. So that's why it's always best practice to use document ready, because then we can move where we load the script. It doesn't really matter. We always are sure that it's ready. Okay, so now we have our setup function. We have our render to-dos function. So then here at the bottom, I'm going to use jQuery document.ready, and I'm going to pass it our setup function to run as a event listener for the ready event. So it's going to run this setup function as soon as that document is ready and we're sure it's we can operate on it. Okay. So now that we've done a bit of refactoring, let's go back to the browser and refresh. And now you should see the hello world bullet points. There we go, zoom in a bit. Now you should see those hello and world. Okay. So now we're taking our model, we're using our render function, our view function, to convert that model to HTML and then put it into the page. Okay, let's go back to the slides momentarily. So we already went through those steps. The last step here was what we just did, right? We appended this to the document, right? Put it in the body somewhere. And in our case, we put it inside of the UL.
Just hop back through.
Yeah.
So I paused on the append.
Mm-hmm.
It wants to append. It has the correct LI, and then it doesn't append.
It could mean that, yes, the issue for you, I believe, yes, your L in your CSS selector is lowercase for to-do list. We'll talk about some debugging tactics in the near future that we can use to combat some of these things. All right, so we've got our model up top. We've got our view now. The last thing we need to do is create our controller, okay? The thing that helps to update the state. How many people have not gotten this to work yet? Oh man, a lot. Okay, so I'll walk around and we'll just make sure that we can get everybody's to work before moving on. Okay. Okay, so let me just oh, it's showing.
Oh, I thought you.
Oh no, we haven't done any of that. You're just working.
Okay, so that's.
I'm not working.
So,
It was. I had a lowercase.
Oh no.
It's okay.
You need a
weird about this. haven't started actually adding things or changing the model or anything like that. So all we're doing is just rendering the initial state. Who else?
How much the market advantage of doing this is, because looking at this scale, very similar, and you would just input the variable with the lives outside. Yeah. So why even do like, because basically text is basically like variables, right? So like, if Muhammad is still attending this class, I would think I doubt the game obviously would be probably the most advanced. It's like, oh, okay, another $1,400 payment.
You know what I did? I just went to.
I put everything on. 3 months.
I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want it.
That's the only place that I it's like for tall people.
Okay.
Well, right, but I'm like, I said, you stick it on the side of the thing.
Yeah.
I have to, but I never really
You're like, well, no, hold on, slow down.
the debit card doesn't have a lot on there, $45, yes.
No, we actually, to pay for everything.
Well, she's not sure if you can track it, I said she's easier, you can track everything.
And then you get $1,000 bills, see all with tax and that. I'm sorry that I paid for $35. It's one of those every purchase gets 2%. And I'm talking like, on the average, I'm talking $2,000 to $4,000. 2%. Every month. No, I let it.
Oh, no, yes.
Especially because it's like it's 2% half, or you actually get points. Like it's also points.
Oh.
Points are better for traveling. Travel one, that one of the best. Are they good at that one? I would probably go. I probably go back to Chase. Moving back west. I would go on Chase.
Good news, I go get some great butter paper here to chase me.
But City Board?
Oh.
Okay, another good day. It's not a hard day.
The issue here is, so in arrays, how do we use the line and practice literally running
Here, think about this. I'm missing 5.75% of that. That was the initial one. So I've actually made, it's American flag. It's just it's a pseudo index stock because you think it chooses a collection of large cap and medium cap. It's basically kind of like American flag. I was talking a lot. That's why
So amazing.
Seriously, no, it literally is your smartest thing. Over time, index stock grows. The only thing you have to figure out is make sure that our 10 years, that money back in the bonds. It's just because that's just.
Eyeballs are only gonna go.
And my original resignation was like February, and Facebook is like, yeah. This year, we'll see. I mean,
Yeah,
also
yeah.
fun somehow. If you're lucky, you can get yeah. I saw Brexit coming. I was like, can I get $500 to this brand here, my first now. I don't have, that's why I said it's right away. Right. So like, I was like, same account. That's so easy. And thankfully, he's like licensed. Because he has to be licensed. Carry duty type shit. So. He carried my role. He's like a mom, but. What's the biggest selling? My tents. I'm excited for my tents. I'm excited for my tents. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, make sure you know what we're gonna do.
We were all going off the fact that we should be suspended as a contract responsibility. We probably want to too much
Yeah,
straw.
they say why he was suspended. They say why he's suspended.
Well, he had he's under that kind of.
Well, yeah.
Although we put a press release saying that he is the guy, so if we're wrong, it's real bad. I didn't put it out. I was today. Yeah. I mean, I did a little work because, you know, hey, did you ever call thing?
Yeah, so we found this like the,
You know, the whole.
Oh, the website, yeah, then we got it.
So it did not actually need to be done by.
Well, a little bit, but like we actually, with our solutions platform, we have these based on what I said, it's like we're just getting
All right, is anybody still? Weird problem.
So on our CMS bus, I just created something like that. Right now, I just
We usually do is usually
Very unlikely.
you have CSS background pictures.
I can try to put it right in, but I can't actually do it. So what I basically is a lot of time to figure out what class is. So I'm nesting CSS. So we'll learn how to use this. But basically, so this is kind of well, yeah, so this is the initial landing page. I kind of tweaked it a little bit, but basically we need to fill out content, membership, this is one, and then just something simple like this. I ended up tweaking some of this stuff down here, but it's here. Yes. All I want is just to get rid of that. It's like a hello chat.
It is so effective since it's like scrolling several pages down.
So that's why I tweaked them right after the first one. If you make it to the bottom, not creative.
No one will ever get that far.
Also, they,
No one will ever get that far.
We'll see what happens. That's
You have a fucking large box.
yeah. Their goal is to try to all you're basically saying is let me see if I just
people,
I have been. I will never buy Wait, this is, hey, FYI,
Yeah.
cray.com, decent website for votes.
All right, sorry about that. I think everybody's now up to speed, so let's keep moving. You know, it's hard to type everything correctly during these code-alongs, and you know, it's just sort of a necessary evil. Next time I'll just paste it there and we can all get on the same page. But, okay, we now have our view working, and we're ready to start making a more sophisticated application, right? And the way we're going to do that, you know, notice all that we've done so far is just render the initial state. That's all we've done. Now what we need to do is like make this a bit more dynamic. We need to allow people to add things, add to-do list items, and to make our application sort of interesting. And the way we're going to do that is by using a controller. Okay, so loosely defined, the controller is sort of a liaison between the model and the view. Okay, it's a line of communication. It's interested in listening for events in the UI and telling the model to update, and then also telling the view that it needs to re-render. Okay, that something has changed in the model. It's time to re-render the UI. Okay, so that's the job of the controller. It's sort of the glue that holds the whole thing together. These are the specific tasks: listening to events, relaying information to the model, and then telling the view when the model is updated. Okay. So that's generally the job of the controller. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, let's go back and write some code, and we'll find out, okay? So we're going to turn back into our JavaScript. All right. So again, we have our model up here. It's just a list of to-dos, an array of to-dos. We have our view, which is this render function that takes that list and then turns it into HTML and puts it on the page. The next thing we're going to do is create our view, our controller.
Is there any reason you decided to just not run the original function and create a function to run the function?
Because we're going to do other stuff in this setup function. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. Without that, the extra stuff, it would have made more sense to just put render to-dos in there. But we're actually going to put more stuff in here, and also we'll need to use that render to-dos again later. Okay. So the first job of the controller here is to set up the event listeners that will make our application function. Okay, so immediately, can we think of any event listeners that we'll need to add to this application in order to make it function? Okay, on enter, are you saying like when the user hits the enter button or when the user hits clicks the submit button?
Well, good.
Okay, potentially both. Let's start with one. We'll just do when they click the submit button, right? So what we want to happen is when the user types things in and then clicks the submit button, when that click happens, we're going to take the text that they entered and enter it into our application, okay? So let's set up that first step here. So we know in order to do this, we're going to use jQuery, and we're going to use jQuery to first find that button. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is find that button. And we can do that if I flip back to the HTML. The button has an ID of submit. Okay, so we can use that ID in order to find that HTML element. All right, so $, parentheses, and a CSS selector for the ID submit. All right, in order to attach event listeners to DOM elements, we're going to use the .on method. And inside of those parentheses, we're going to pass two things. The first thing, the name of the event that we care about. In this case, we care about the click event. Right? We want to know when the user clicks on that submit button. The second thing that we're going to pass is the event listener function. Okay? And what do you think is an appropriate name for this event listener function? What would be a good name for it?
Anonymous.
Okay, one option would be to use an anonymous function here. What is another option? What would be, if we're going to name it, what would be a good name for it? Yeah. Yeah, so that's an option, right? That's very literal. Like that's what's happening in JavaScript, right? We're going to push something on your array. But what's happening is semantic, right? In terms of our application. Yeah, we're adding a to-do item, right? So I think the semantic name here is probably more appropriate. So let's use that. So we're going to call this add item or add to do. Let's call it that, add to do. Okay, we're not including the parentheses here. The reason we're not including parentheses is because we're passing the function itself. We're not calling the function here. We're going to allow jQuery to call that function when the click happens, okay, which is some unknown time in the future. Right. Okay, so we've set up that event listener. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to define this add to do function. So I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to give it the name add to do. And we use parentheses and the curly braces to set up the skeleton of this function. All right, so we kind of did this last class where the first thing we do is we find that input HTML element. We get the value out of it using jQuery's .val function. And then in our last example, we took that and we put it directly into the DOM. Right? We put it and created a list item right here, put that directly into the DOM. Well, now, using this MVC architecture, we're going to do it a little bit differently. Rather than putting this directly into the DOM, we're going to add it to our model. Okay? So we're going to add it to the model, and then we're going to allow the view to re-render the application with the new updated model. Okay? So we've separated these concerns rather than having this one to-do function that's responsible for both getting this value, changing the application state, and updating the HTML all in one. We're going to delegate parts of our application to the different concerns here, the model, view, and the controller. Okay. So the first thing is just like the last example, we're going to create a variable here, and we'll just call it input. Inside of that variable, we'll store the value. And I don't remember the ID off the top of my head that we're looking for, so I'm going to go back to the HTML to do input ID here. So I'll just Control-C, copy that ID, and paste it there. So we're going to find that to do input, and just like we did last time, we're going to use jQuery's .val to get the value that the user has typed into that input text. Okay. So we've got that, we've stored it into this input variable. All right, in our last application, here's where we would find that UL and append it to that list directly. Instead of doing that, what do you think we're going to do? Well, we need to update the state, update the model. So how are we going to update the model? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just as Kent alluded to earlier, we're going to push that value to that to-do array, to-dos array. We've got the to-dos array that we defined up here, the model. And we're going to do .push. And inside of those parentheses, we're going to push the value that the user entered. Okay. Now we need to communicate back to our view that the model has updated, and it's time to recreate the HTML. Okay? Anybody want to guess how we're going to do that? We can do all that in one quick line. Yes.
Just call the render to-dos function.
Exactly. We're just going to call the render to-dos function in order to re-render our UI. Okay. So this renders to-dos function just takes the application state, whatever it happens to be, and turns it into the HTML that we need on the page. All right, so let's see if this works. It may not. I'll give you a couple seconds to finish typing. Again, we're taking the input that the user put into that text box, we're pushing it to our model state, and we're then going to just tell the view, hey, it's updated, go ahead and re-render.
And previously we pushed it into, we created a new list item.
Yeah, previously, remember, we just made a list item. It wasn't stored in JavaScript at all. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens. Some people are discovering that it's not exactly what we would hope for. We've got this hello world. I'm going to add a new one that says, go to the store. And when I submit it, well, we've got a problem, don't we? It's not only do we have this hello world, we also have got hello world and go to store again, right? So it's duplicating. If we added another one, plan for class, Now we're getting hello world, go to store, and plan for class. Why is that? Yeah.
You're just pushing to the same larger array, therefore the array is just getting larger because the function doesn't understand nor conceptualize the fact that the first two are already displayed. It is going to display all four, and then 5 after you added 5.
Right. So each time we're rendering, we're iterating through the entire array, and we're appending to whatever HTML is already there. Now there's a pretty easy way to combat this, to fix this. Does anybody know what that is? Okay. That's one thing we could do, potentially. There's a better option. Yeah.
You could pop as you appended to the you could just delete it as you
So yeah, so as we're rendering, each time we're rendering, we could just get rid of the old ones so that they wouldn't be there next time. We could do that, but we want to store those things in JavaScript so that we can access them in other parts of our program if we need to. So if we're popping them, we're kind of losing that in our application, which is not great. What's another option maybe? Yeah.
Instead of appending in every loop, you could just build a string.
Okay.
That just kind of appends like activates that string, and then you just have all the HTML that you interface, and then you do .html.
That's, yes, okay. So what's being said is, somewhere in this function, we need to just overwrite the HTML. Okay? Rather than appending each individual thing to whatever's there, at some point, we've got to just get rid of what's already there. So probably the easiest way for us to do that is like this. Here in our render to-dos, at the beginning of this function, I'm just going to find our to-do list UL, and I'm going to just erase the HTML that's inside of it. Okay? So remember, on line 12 here, on this line var source equals, on that line when we use .html, we're getting the HTML inside of that template. On line 11 here, to-do list .html empty string, we're setting the HTML inside of that UL to be an empty string. In effect, we're emptying out whatever's inside of there. We're clearing the to-do list. So now we can re-render all of the things in our to-do list without worrying about it. We don't have to try to find out what's already there and get the difference between what's added and all of that jazz. We just can start from scratch each time and re-render it into the UL. Yeah?
Seems like that's more work for the program, like just remembering what's there and having to do it.
Is it more work for the program? Potentially. Is it more work for the developer? No. And it turns out that in this case, it's better to be easier for the developer than to worry about the performance implications because they're so minute and not really effective.
But I guess I'm more complex.
And potentially in more complex programs, we might care, but in that case, what we'd probably do is just have small sections that we're updating of the UI, rather than doing like the whole page at once, right? We could update just the sections that have updated. But generally, this is going to be the easiest way to just start from scratch every time we render.
You also probably use some databases and AJAX requests instead of.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's see now if this works. All right, I'll refresh. We get our initial state. I type in go to the store, hit submit, and voila. Yes?
What is the easiest way to add, besides just on click, the on piece of, the on submit as well with it? Is there an easy way without having to create two?
So you're asking one for the enter button and one for click at the same time? So if we had used an HTML form,
right,
the submit event happens either when the last form field is entered or when the submit button is pressed. So in that case, we could do it that way. The other thing we could do is we could attach a listener for click and a listener for on key press. And if that key that's been pressed is the enter button.
In the same, you'd have to do it both.
Well, you could, there is a way, but it would probably be more effort than it's worth. Crisis averted, hopefully. All right. So any more questions so far? So now we've got an application where we can add to-dos, we can re-render them at any point. Okay? Yes, question? Yeah. Again, so this controller function here, it's going to grab the input that the user did, update the model, and then tell the view that it needs to re-render. Something's changed, it needs to re-render. Yeah?
In all cases, will the function in the controller section be the only code that's in the setup run document? Everything else will just be.
Generally, yes. I mean, the things that happen in the setup are sort of controller tasks, right? They're, setting up the event listeners, telling the view to render for the first time, those sort of things. Those are what kind of controller tasks. Now, not every program is going to be, this well delineated. Like this is definitely model code. This is definitely view code. This is definitely controller code. So you're not always going to see this as cleanly organized as this. But generally, the answer is yes. The things that happen at setup are the concern of the controller. More questions? All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make this a little bit more sophisticated. So far we can add to it. But if you remember from the last to-do application we had, you could also complete the task by clicking it, and it would show the strike through. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, we're going to do that one together. And then I'll ask you to do one on your own, one new feature for the to-do application on your own. Okay? So let's start on this one together. So let's take a look at it. Last time we had it so that if you just clicked it, it would automatically put the line through. We're going to make it a little bit different this time. We're going to put a link next to it that says complete. And when we click that link, it's going to show the line through, show it completed. Okay? So what do you think the first thing we need to do is? Or what's a thing that we need to do, I suppose? First is subjective. So if we're going to add a link next to it, what do we need to do to add that link next to it? Somebody with a hand, so I can. Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know.
Well, just, what were we thinking?
Well, I was thinking we would need to insert something into that slot of the array.
Okay. You can insert something inside the array, but we don't really want to touch the HTML directly like that. So what else can we do? Using a skill that maybe we talked about at the beginning of this class. Yeah. Okay. So what do we? So what thing are we using to create the HTML for these? Yeah. Right. We're using a template. Right. So in order to get a link next to each one of these things, we're just going to add a link to our template, right, as a new part of the HTML that gets rendered as part of our view. So let's do that. So I'm going to go into Sublime. We'll go into the index.html. And we're going to focus down here. I'll just put an empty line here so we can see it easier. So here's our template, right? So far it's very simple. Just this li with the text in there. Okay? So in order to add a link, we're just going to add some HTML here. I'm going to add an anchor tag. I'm going to give it a class called, we'll just call the class complete. And it's going to say complete.
No anchor?
I mean, you could put an href, but it's not real. It's not a real link. It's not going to another web page, so I'm not going to put an href.
According to href number sign.
Fair enough. Okay, so we just added some HTML to our template because we want this complete link to show up after next to every to-do list item. So we should see it right away if we save this. We should be able to just go back to the browser, refresh, and see this there. Interestingly, it's black. Probably because I didn't have an href. So I'll just add href. We could also just use CSS to change it.
That's all you changed?
Yeah. So now we have the href. The browser knows to treat it like a link. All right.
Because that's not.
So we're just adding this link here. I'll just post it in Slack.
So equals an unknown ID.
Yeah, so this is like a thing people use sometimes in links that aren't actually links to new pages. Okay, so most time when we use a link, right, it's a link to go to a new web page, right? To say like cnn.com/whatever article, right? When we're using a link as like more like a button, right, a way to modify our UI in some way, we can just do this href hashtag, which basically doesn't really do anything, but it gives us the underline and the blue and the cursor pointer thing as well. We could do all that in JavaScript, I mean CSS as well, but this is easier. All right, so we have our link now. Let's go back to the index.js. Okay, so we're gonna just go down thing by thing here. We have an issue with our model, okay? This model works very well if we're just storing the text that goes in each to-do list item, but we have a new part of our application state that this model can't keep track of alone. What is that thing, that new thing that we need to keep track of? Yeah, exactly. We need to know if each to-do item, we not only need to know the text of the to-do item, we need to know if it has been completed or not. So does anybody have any ideas how we might change this model in order to represent both the text and whether or not that thing is completed? Yeah.
Make each to an object and store.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Instead of making this a list of strings, we can change this to be a list of objects. And each object can have two keys, one being text. Oops, I've got caps lock on. One being text, and the other being, we'll just call it complete. Okay. We still have an array, still a list of things. We've just changed those things from being strings to objects. So we can store more information about each to-do list item. So now we know not only the words in there, we also know whether or not it's been completed. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to have to make some more changes to our view. Okay? Because right now our view is capable of displaying the text perfectly fine, but it's not capable of conveying whether or not this thing has been completed. Right? And the way we do that is we're going to use CSS to do the text decoration line through, just like in last class. The way we're going to add that CSS is a bit different. All right? Yeah, essentially. But yes, we're going to need to do a conditional of some sort, right? Definitely. We'll need to do some sort of conditional based on whether or not it's completed. But the way we're going to do that is instead of doing our conditional here in JavaScript, we're actually going to do our conditional within our template. Okay? So it turns out that not only can templates have these placeholders for dynamic data, they can also do more complex things like conditionals, or even loops if we get really really advanced. We can use loops inside of our template as well. So you could imagine we could write a template that's for the whole list rather than a single list item, maybe down the line. But for now, we're going to experiment with conditionals in order to add a class to this list item if that list item has been completed. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So we know how to add a class to an HTML element. We use the class attribute. Okay. So far, so good, right? Now, the way that we can do a conditional in handlebars, well, we use these double curly braces again. But here we're going to do it inside of this class string. We're then going to do pound if. Pound if.
This is all documented. So.
Yeah, if you go to the Handlebars website, you can find documentation on this and all of the other various things you can do in Handlebars templates. Okay, pound if. Then the thing that comes after that is the property that we want to check. Okay, the thing that we want to check to see if it's true or false, which in this case is what? We're going to look to see if complete is true or not. So we're just going to say if complete. If complete. Okay. We're going to close those two curly braces, and then we're going to make another double curly brace set that has a / if. Exactly. So this is where the if starts. There's where the if ends. Anything that comes in between those two things will only appear in our HTML if complete is true. So inside of there, we're going to add a class name that will only appear in our template if complete is true. Okay, so we'll call this class, well, not to overload this word, but we're just going to call it complete too, because that sounds, that's accurate. So that's what we want to call it. But maybe I'll just call this complete class, to be clear, right? So complete here is the key in the object that we're passing into the template. And complete class is the class name that only appears here if this is true. Question?
I guess we change the class, just the same gang for having the same class.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's call this class, instead of this, let's call this completed. Completed, right? That's a better class name. Completed. Yeah, so what do we need to do now? We've got this class, and we want that class to apply some styles to this list item. So how are we going to do that? I know you know the answer to everything. I'm trying to give other people a chance.
Just write some styles.
Yeah, we're just going to write some styles. Let's just open up our CSS over here. Style.css. And we're just going to write a style for this class. So we've got this class called completed. And we're just going to add that style that we talked about, text decoration. What's that? It's a class?
The name of the class.
Yeah, the name of the class was completed. I changed it to completed. Sorry, I went back and forth on this. I first had it complete, and then I had complete class. But I landed on completed. I like that one. Question?
Could you explain why it's a class?
So why are we doing it as a class?
Yeah.
Because we want to apply some styles here, if that if this thing has been complete.
Oh, how is it a class? Like, how can you tell?
Because it is inside of this class attribute,
Okay.
right? So class equals
Okay.
this thing. Now, this part is going to disappear when we actually render it. What's going to be there is either this completed class, if the complete key is true, or nothing at all.
Yeah, I see the class.
Yeah. So we can use this inside of a class. We can also use this for whole chunks of HTML if we wanted. It can be used anywhere in our template to conditionally include content. Yes?
So is the complete after hashtag if referring back to the key in the template?
Exactly. This complete here is referring to the key in the template,
And it knows that it's
in the
boolean,
object.
So it knows it's like if it means true.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily know that it's a Boolean, but what it's going to check is this thing truthy? Yeah, so true is truthy, and thus it'll be.
If you say if equals true, would it do the same thing?
So no, you can't do, that's a good point. You cannot do any if conditionals that are more complex than just one value here. So you can't do equality checks, you can't do inequality checks, you can't do like ands and ors. The only thing you can do is this. You can check one key for truthiness.
So if there was like a key and there is a color green, then would you say if green?
No, so you could make a key that has a value is the thing green, and the value would be a true or false, right?
Right, so it has to be true false.
it-
True, false.
Or truthy or falsy, but yeah, yes.
So you want to add class,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe add some other class.
Yeah, like if we wanted to have a class for everything, we could just include it outside of this conditional. So I could say like to-do list item, right? If I wanted them all to have a class. If we wanted to include another class conditionally, we could just have another full conditional after that. Yeah. If we wanted to include two classes, if the complete thing is there, we could put it in there, right? Okay. So this if is used to conditionally add content into our template if this key is true. If the value at that key is true. So we're only going to see this completed class if that value is true. All right, so let's go back here. We have this completed class that we've created. We're going to give it a text decoration line through. So now, if that completed key in our model changes to true, when we render, the completed class will be on the list item. And because we have this in our style sheet, we'll see that thing with a line through it. Okay? All right, but we're not quite done yet. We're going to now have to add something to our controller. So we've updated our model now. We've now updated our view. Finally, we need to update our controller to listen for events that would result in the thing being completed, and then also having a function that does that completion, that does the event completion. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is set up a new event listener. Now, what thing are we going to attach this event listener to? Yeah. Right, okay. So let's take a look at this. In our template here, we have this A tag, right? What we really care about is when this link complete here is clicked, correct? That's the thing we're waiting for. It's when this anchor tag with the word complete in it to be clicked. Okay? We've given that thing a class complete. Okay? So we can use that class complete to find this thing and attach an event listener. Okay, so let's, yeah? What's that?
Like question mark?
Oh, I guess you could do that, yeah. All right, so let's start with that. Let's find the elements with the complete class. And when that element is clicked, we're going to run some function. I'll just call it complete to do. So we have a problem. We have a problem. We know how to solve it. Is every to-do that exists on the page when the page first loads? No, right? We allow users to add new to-dos as part of our application. So is this going to work? No, this won't work because every time the user enters a new to-do, we'll have a new list item with a new complete link that doesn't have this event listener attached. So let's take a look at our index.html. So when the page first loads, there are no to-dos in here. No list items in here to attach to. So it's no good trying to attach to them right away. What is here is a few other things. This UL is here, right, when the page loads. So we can attach to this UL right away, and we're good to go. This body is there too. We can attach to that if we wanted to as a common parent. But I'm going to pick this one because it's right there, and that's going to have all of the list items inside of it. So instead of attaching to those list items, which aren't there yet, we're going to attach to this UL that is there, and we're going to use a delegated event listener to listen for its children's events. All right, so to do a delegated event listener, what we're going to do here is we're going to change this from the complete itself to the to-do list UL. Okay, so remember that UL had an ID to-do list. So we're going to attach to that thing, and then we're going to make this a delegated event listener by adding a CSS selector here. So we've moved that complete from here to there. And in place of the complete, we've added the parent that's actually there when the page loads, the to-do list UL. So now when that complete link is clicked, that event will start at that A, it'll bubble up to the LI, which will bubble up to the UL, which will trigger this event listener. Questions about that? Okay, so now we have an event listener that works for our dynamic children. And the next thing we need to do is define this complete to-do function. So down here after the add to-do, I'm going to define a new function called complete to-do. Okay. So we know how to find the thing that was clicked on, right? How do we find the thing in the DOM that was clicked on in a jQuery event listener? There's a special keyword that we can use to find the thing in the DOM that was clicked in a jQuery event listener. Yeah. We need to use the this keyword. In a jQuery event listener, this means the thing that was actually clicked on, or the thing where the event actually occurred, the specific thing. So I'm going to use jQuery parentheses this, and this will go get that DOM element that was actually clicked on. So what type of element is this in this situation? What type of DOM element, I should say, HTML element? Yeah, exactly. It's an anchor tag. Because the anchor tag is the one that was actually clicked. Okay. All right. So I'm going to show you something. What we need to do, what we need to determine is which thing in our model do we need to modify? Okay, that's the question we're trying to answer on this line. Which to-do list item in our array do we need to modify? That's the question that we're trying to answer. Okay, that's the question that we're trying to answer here. Which thing do we need to modify in our array? So what do we need to get? What kind of address can we use to access an item in an array? That's a cryptic question, yeah. Yes, we need to figure out the index in the array that we need to update. Okay? The index in the array that we need to update. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. Yes, question?
You have jQuery, so simply.
Right, and then what would we do? Yes, we could do that, but that's updating the DOM directly, which is not what we want to do. We want to update our model and then have our model re-render. Okay, so yes, we could use like jQuery's like parent in this case to get the li, which is the parent of the anchor tag, and then we could just directly use .css to add a line through it. We could do that. That's not the controller's job. The controller's job is not to modify the HTML. The controller's job is just to relay that message to the model and the view. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use jQuery's .parent function, which will give us the li, right? Because the anchor tag, remember, is inside of the li. So the parent of the anchor tag is the li. Everybody with me so far? Okay. jQuery also has a function, luckily for us, called .index. And .index will tell us what number child am I of my parent. Okay, so if my parent is the UL, am I the 0 child, the 1 child, the 2 child, the 3 child? And this index is going to line up exactly with the index in our array. Okay, so just to tell you what I'm talking about, if our HTML, don't actually type this, but if our HTML looks like this, we have an li here with a go to store. And inside of there, we have an anchor tag that says complete. Where we're starting is here at this anchor tag. We're going to the parent, which is the li. We're then asking, which number child am I of my parent, of the UL? And in this case, this li is the 0 index. Right? It's the first child, it's at 0 index. Okay? And it just so happens that that's the same index in our model. Okay, so we've got this number, but we don't have any, we haven't stored it anywhere yet. So we need to create a variable to store this. And I'm going to call that variable to do index. So again, $this is the anchor tag. We're going to the anchor tag's parent, which is the li. We're saying, which number child am I in the DOM? Okay, now that we have that index, we can use it to modify the model. So our model, remember, is the to-dos array. And we need to access the to-do at the to-do index. Okay, now that we've accessed it, what do we need to do now? Yeah.
So we could change the key that's complete.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, if we reference back up to that to-dos list, up here, to-dos array, each of these things has two keys, text and a complete. What we want to do is we want to change the value that's at complete to true. And we'll do that by using dot notation. Correct. Parent and index are both jQuery functions. Yes. Doing this without jQuery would be significantly more code. Okay, so now we've updated our model, right? So here, in these first two lines, we're updating our model, right? In our complete to do, these two lines, we're updating our model as well. So what's the final step here? What's that? Yeah, we're just going to re-render. I'm just going to tell the model here, we need to re-render. And since we've changed the complete to true, that completed class will show up on the item that has been modified.
So is it like passing through the HTML twice? Like it's rendering and then has a new function and it's
What's happening is it's rendering every time the model changes. Okay? So remember, this is only going to be added. This is only going to be run when that submit button is clicked. This is only going to be run when one of those complete links is clicked. So we have to re-render every time our model changes so that the UI reflects the state of the application. So in our state, our model changes. We have to re-render so that we can see those changes. All right, so we're going to go back to the browser and see if this works. Oh, well, I've got a little issue here. This now says, oh, right. Let's take another look. So here's our issue now. So before, we were creating this object called to-do, where we are storing the text here. Right? We are creating a new object here. But what is each item in this to-dos list? It's an object itself. So we no longer have to do this. We can just use this directly in here. Right? Because to-dos at index I is always going to be an object. Yeah, I just deleted where we were creating the object, and all I'm doing is I'm passing this object at index I to our template.
Can you scroll up a little bit? I want to see your model.
Question? Yeah. All right, let's give it a shot. Okay, we're back to looking pretty good. Let's see what happens when we complete. Oh no.
I don't think you have a style tag in HTML.
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
You didn't call the file, but I was.
Yes, you're right. One step at a time. We haven't included our CSS up here. So we need to do that. We're gonna add a link tag. The CSS style.css. Okay. If you're having errors, we're gonna work on the next feature like independently in just a second, and I'll be around and we can help debug. But let's just see if this is working now. And beautiful. We're updating our model, then re-rendering, and we can see this changing in our DOM. Question? Oh, you want to see the CSS? Yeah, we just added a completed class with a text decoration line through. Okay, we have one more issue. If I say go to the store, that doesn't look quite right. Does anybody know why? Does anybody know why?
The other key, you don't have the
Right. So if we look back at our JavaScript, when we're adding the to-do, we are just pushing a string onto that array of objects. Right? Because this input is just the text that the user entered. What we need in that array is an object. So we're going to have to construct an object here to push onto the array rather than pushing the string on itself. So we can do that just by putting an object in between those parentheses, and we'll give it a text key input and a completed key. Oops. Or complete key. What's it called? Complete, yes. Complete key, and we're going to start it off as false, right? When we first add it, it's not complete. So everybody see that? We have that list of objects up top, so we need to make sure the things that we're adding to the list are also objects with the same keys. Okay, if I refresh, go to the store, looks right. When we click it, it will complete appropriately. Okay, so now on your own, to wrap up the class tonight, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to add a delete link next to this complete link. And when we click that delete link, we want it to remove that list item entirely. So as we're completing things, we can sort of clear off our to-do list and make room for new things. So we're going to add a delete link right here. And when we click that link, what we want to happen is that list item just disappears. Okay? All right, so go ahead and start thinking about that. Start working on that, and I'll be around. If you're broken and need help, just let me know. Oh yes, of course. If your code is broken, let me clarify. All right, I'll start here. We're gonna just go around.
So I don't understand what you did there, because if you just delete this, then you're still calling something that doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, so what I placed here, instead of this, I just passed it to do's at index I. Because that thing is an object. Exactly. And then I got it. Right? Because the thing at index I is an object with the right keys. And so when you push, you have to push an object with the same structure.
No, I got that part. I just didn't know what you had changed this.
Yeah.
Because I was finding it was like, what do you mean to do? There is no to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because you had to put a variable and said that variable is going to be happening. Anybody else just broken? Yes.
Alright,
So,
go ahead. So,
some of the stuff in your phone, this
and then,
So in an array, what values to separate the individual codes? And I can be on zero. I like to so we still got an issue. We're not seeing that issue. Okay, so
So we're not referencing. Yeah, because let's look at the depth of the system. It's in this, we're here. So we're on the same level, so you know what's in the CSS folder and then access this. So that's how I set it. So that's not, like, these are set, and what we could, that's it. For a long time, I could that's the Slack, so it's gonna be. So one thing. So like I told you, each of those things now is an object that has this text key, which is what we're looking for. Some other stuff. So rather than ever having a object, you already had it, so it's weird. Like before, I didn't just put that up. Before it was this, which is this object. Instead of doing that, we're just gonna do that, and then we go here, so control us to set up.
So this was when we had.
So we would have just strings, because we needed an object.
So we can delete all of that, right?
So we get rid of that. Okay. So that's one issue. Let's go ahead and just see how happens now.
Yeah, but it needs to complete.
Still something weird going on. Sorry. Look at the console.
And that's the. The object that has these layers.
Like it makes her need to figure out what else.
That we're actually iterating down. And you can iterate through the two asset, each item is an object.
It's on your source here.
Into this.
That's just.
Yeah, wow.
Okay, so I think I see what's going on here. That's this class happening. That's starting. Over there. And we need an image that shape. No, this one's right. That one's all good. It's just missing one. Alright.
So,
Try to fix that.
it needs to, since we're gonna be using, it needs to pass an object with certain keys.
So not there, because remember that's a class, that's the class name, we need it
So
there.
you need to pass.
Oh,
right.
yeah, sorry. So
Yeah,
this is how,
you need to pass in the object.
so watch trying to help you with that. So you see how this,
These are, yeah, these are the
so this hit is getting secure, it won't be left, it's either just like, and it's inside of this.
Right side,
Okay.
so, this is just iterating through these objects, passing your text and then adding whatever you get back to the HTML. So here.
That makes sense.
Right. Well, actually, no, I created a blank object, that's not good. You find it as like nothing, right? But nothing is not actually doing anything.
And you're gonna say, string that I want to is gonna be what's returned.
But that's what I did, so let's see, like, I just copied, that's essentially what.
Like that first
No, you don't, I think you just have to remove it from the object. Remove item from the object.
So back to the HTML.
That's just like text. Correct, yeah, sometimes like other areas.
Use like dot.
You can use the
They make sure that you're passing.
Oh, I see.
there's a delete,
This
Has like changed.
quote there.
so I can do it.
Yes, now it's like.
Okay.
So this is this whole thing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, straight up.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, understanding like all the simple syntax works.
Just, so you find the index, right?
Yeah.
Delete index.
No, you're good. options like this.
The
Aspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works. So now you can probably change it.
I deleted it, but it's still spawned.
Oh, ta-da.
Well, now I want to add shit.
Okay, ads. Okay, we got issue with the page. So let's take a look at your. Okay, so that all looks good. Make sure you include the CSS. That's good.
So last week, so you want, this is a CSS selector. So since you're selling to the class of the
It's not delete.
Okay.
you're trying to sorry, you gotta say at the bottom of this where it's the top, it's top, it's the answer. So it's just.
Do I need, just see if I need that. So it's not the new, yeah, it's not adding the comments. It's like, CSS is probably, it's just not adding. Yeah, that's confusing. We need this improvement. What's the reason? It's cheating. Okay. I mean, you can do that.
Okay, alright.
Just about that first letter there.
Okay, so it has to match exactly this time.
Exactly. Yeah, the classes are these cases. Just like variable names.
Oh, sweet, okay, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, so show me how you're reading. Yep.
Pretty much just exactly.
Yeah. Yes, okay, so far so good. The issue here is how splice works. So look up the splice sign and because there's just one thing that's.
So I figured out there's just like the delete, which will delete an object as an index, but I can't clear out the A and the two links, even though I
Yeah.
did this .parent.html blank.
Yeah, so it'll delete the value there, but it'll leave the index there with undefined. So delete isn't actually something else that will remove an array. You never know. Well, copy removes a specific item, the last one. Oh, yeah. Think of something in there. Yeah, the last one. So not exactly what you want. So you have to look up, right, how do you remove an item at an index?
Remove an index. Awesome.
Okay. So, tell me, what is this complete use? So what is this? Exactly, which is what? What is HTML? Okay, is the input problem, is the text is exactly the users. What's up? So submit is really quickly what an add to
when we want to complete the table, but it's good. We just, if we think about the UI, it's the user typicals. Yeah, the complete, right? So there's an A tag, an anchor tag, right? That we added to our different. That's the thing that we're clicking. So if you look at your this here, I added this in.
Oh, okay.
You know your
Alright,
front work.
alright,
It's actually
I
inside.
have it.
Yeah, so the whole open to close. This is inside of this. Okay, alright, so we've identified this, right? Is that what? Okay. So in HTML, what is the parent? Right. Okay. In HTML, what is going to be the parent? That's in the template, but when we add it to the HTML,
Okay, so splice has, you read, find
so
the
that index will tell us what
If you
number
don't add
in this
how
UI
much
is that percent.
you want to delete from the
So the first
splice.
is
So
that one.
like splice is not just deleting one thing, you can delete
Second one.
that thing plus a whole ton of other things. So you can splice out an entire box. And it returns it. But what you basically do is you only want it to delete that index and one. One meaning one index.
We store this index.
You could read, if you read it here, you have
You
it.
get it on stack.
See like right here,
Oh, yeah.
so if you read right
That's always something stupid.
here. So index, how many items, right? Because you can put in items
Which
that.
child is this?
So an integer, like what position is like, and then how many required. The number of items you're gonna move is set to 0, no items will be removed. So you want to remove one item at that index. So all you need is sublime
First assignment.
and you can
So now we have this question number.
So that
We can use that index,
You
actually
delete.
find items.
deletes from this way.
Right.
So one,
I've got my.
no, you don't want to delete. I did it last time. And it was delete.
So
then-
these hours left.
From that.
If you wanna call CSS, if you wanna call.
So.
Like
We're what you need to do is what we're supposed to do. Stop twice. And here's where we put our index. Well, you want to move to the index.
So that's just like this.
This HTML comments and this classes that we create. So we can
Wait, the HTML doesn't really do anything.
And then add
So
one.
you need to like tell them what's the idea.
Well, you have to render it too.
Thing introduced,
You need to like zero.
well, let's look at the introduced. What is the thing in index 0? That's the thing in index 0 at key complete. What's the thing in index 0?
Alright, what's your console saying? No, console.
Exactly. Whole object. Okay? So
Did you add the on-click function?
So if we look at it,
So you did it, you want to delete, what you name the concept.
then we do copy.
So like,
I know. Be on the computer.
You'd have to be more militant about exit tickets though.
so let's look at your index real quick. Class delete, okay, so go back up,
Over here.
yeah, so let's go back, so,
Now that we've.
Oh, I was trying to make it.
I want this to
someone
be.
can- Right, so I was trying to see if someone had complete. That didn't make sense.
no, we want to do that, so do that there, there you go,
So that.
yeah.
Oh.
You just put it on.
Remember that the
So we've.
Ah.
Everything is updating that model, right? And we're saying, if you go ahead and really nice.
Thank you for displacing.
Yeah, I think she's talking about. I was trying to. I was trying to like say once you pick your feet,
No,
then you don't get off.
exactly, that's gonna be for whenever somebody.
My friend.
And when I bring her in there, it's the whole view of each time it's there.
She was 2 cents away. They put the base on.
No, because it doesn't actually really matter.
So they hurt.
It's not being.
Yeah, yeah. Every time I add an item, it's gonna be able to take that.
They
So the next thing you do is
the
create a model such that the leaf.
and we
Such
blew our
as stays
water
up
on.
here.
Oh my
God. Next to the link, when we click it, we need to remove something. Not necessarily, what we wanna do is we want to.
No, it's because of the meat thing.
Place the leaf next to it, well, next to it.
You just like ran over and you have drug, right?
Yeah, just, she
There's no
said.
bonds or no, just
Yeah,
like.
that's like-
Yeah, this is my friend. They were apparently down the street. Just like drove down 10 minutes before. So she said they really lucky they were shots and screaming. I don't know.
Yeah, you see this big box there. Yes, you guys,
What do you wanna do to make it?
so one, I think is probably an issue if you want to do what.
I want the CSS to.
So,
Want the CSS to disappear, or do you actually?
so one thing here. That's what it's.
So, remember, how do you complete this? You complete this, does it actually just go to that page? Like, it is,
Also,
what happens when you want to what's the first tab?
Up there,
What it shows? Is that so the first thing it's doing is it's we all have.
Adding in everything.
So you want the CSS just to be.
I'm wondering if I
Is that always there?
So I put a closed one there.
Yeah, it get pretty confusing to be like, okay, fine. Index. It may just go away.
Oh, shit. Alright.
That's what you want, that's fine.
Oh, man. Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's working.
How are you doing?
This week? It's like you can make it with the new year.
So let me, I'm missing the interaction.
Is that the whole time? We just missed it? It's always. Yeah, just you see this. Okay, one problem solved.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Nancy says,
Uh,
baby steps. Yeah, mine's not right.
What?
Oh, yeah. So. There's so here, you'd be closing the big side, and this needs to be closing this side. It's just very
Just perfect. You're just perfect.
See that?
So they're going to have all of those.
Okay, so now, yeah. No, you always do something. It's still an issue. It's getting closer. Yeah. I was here. We're gonna try. There we go.
All right. Before we head out, a couple of things. If you haven't finished yet, that's okay. I'll post the solution tonight. You can look at it. I'll go over it a little bit on Tuesday. But there's a few more things I want to talk about before we leave. Okay, so first thing is this. I haven't really talked about the final project yet, and it's about time we do that. So the final project in this class, pretty open-ended. The idea is to just create sort of a JavaScript application that uses the concepts that we learn in class, but really, the end product is much, very much up to you. I'll ask you, to tell me what you plan on doing, so I can say, that's too ambitious, that's not ambitious enough. We can kind of make sure that you're picking a good project, but largely open-ended. We want this class to be useful for you, and so whatever you think is a good project to sort of build on your skills, that is probably okay. Now, with that said, I do have some resources where you can start looking at things to get ideas. There's the GA gallery of projects that previous students have done, and this is a pretty good resource. If you look at JavaScript development, this class is brand new, so there's not actually a lot there. But the WDI projects are going to be pretty much in the same vein. So if you look at the WDI projects as sort of inspiration for what you might work on, that's a pretty good place to start. If you have ideas, you want to bounce them off of me, please do. There's a link here to the actual, that link's broken. I'll fix that link. There's a sheet for the actual assignment, but like I said, it's pretty open-ended. So now, here's some dates. These are mostly to just make sure that you're keeping up and you're working on it over time. The first one is going to be, I'd like to have some idea of what you want to work on a week from today. Okay, so actually, is that a week from today? No, that's a week from Tuesday or Monday. So you have about a little over a week to think about it, get some inspiration if you haven't already, and and by that day you should pretty much know what you're doing, so you can begin work on it. On August 2nd, which I think is like a week or two after that, you should start having like a draft of your UI. So some HTML, maybe some templates that you can use, and something, or wireframes, something of that nature, so that you can start seeing it come together. On August 16th, we'll have a full in-class where you can work on your final project with all of us available to answer questions and stuff. And then finally, the last day of class, we'll do presentations. Okay? Any questions about that? So do look at that General Assembly gallery for inspiration. Feel free to Slack me and bounce off ideas, and I can give you, my quick opinion, or come to office hours or meet me at some point, and we can talk about, what we think is a good idea and an appropriately ambitious project. Okay, next thing. I think maybe I skipped it. Oh, there's no link here to the assignment. On the GitHub page, there's a link to the assignment. which I'll post in Slack. So the assignment for the weekend is going to be very much like what we just did. It's creating a simple application using this sort of MVC architecture with templates, views, and models, and controller. This simple application is going to do, it's just going to be a counter, like for doing like a head count at like a party or something. It's going to have a add button to increment by 1, a minus button to take away 1, and a 0 button that will reset the counter at 0. Okay. So those are the only requirements. And then if the count goes above 100, we want to show the count in a red color. And if it comes below 0, we want to show it as a blue color. Okay, so if we get to a negative number, say, we'll have it blue. All right, so pretty loose requirements here, but we want to use those same strategies that we did to create this to-do application to build this count application. And again, I'm going to post the solution to the to-do application, and you can use that as a reference as you start to build your countly application. Okay, a couple readings from Eloquent.js. Chapter 14 is sort of what we did this week. Chapter 17 will be what we're focusing on next week. All right, questions about this? There's a link to it in the repository. I'll also post that link quickly in Slack. We're going to fork this repo, clone it, work on it, push it, and then submit a pull request like we did for assignment 3. There's instructions in here if you've forgotten that process. All right, finally, if you would fill out the exit ticket, that would be wonderful. Thanks everybody for doing the mid-course survey on time. That was great. We got beer. And if you have any last-minute questions about your to-do application, I can come around. We can talk, for the next several minutes or so. We're going to get a lot of practice with this. We're going to, basically every application we'll build from here on out is going to use these principles. We're going to create our model. We're going to create our view. We're going to create our controller. And then we'll just be adding more and more features to it. So that's great.
So I'm wondering, I guess, ideally both, but is it, so say I wanted to catch up. Should I spend more of my time trying to read more? Or
it really kind of depends on what sort of learner. Some people get a lot from reading text, seeing people walking through the problem. Some people get the most benefit from just diving in and hacking on something. So it works. So, it's sort of an individual thing.
right.
For me, I always just dive into it and just keep hitting the keys until it works. That's my style. I read too. It's just when I read, I'm doing it. Once I already know the topic and I want to become more familiar. Yeah.
I don't know what the problem is. So the link is here, and it's but it's not here.
So you've got a link. It's got that's. Oh, okay. So that's interesting. All right. So you chose to do it as a class. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's totally an option.
Just getting rid of it.
Yeah, you could just remove it from the array. But this will work. So let's yeah.
So I just do something. I just do exactly the same thing. So.
And we need to define the text. Like the CSS would do that.
I put the red just in case the thing didn't turn right.
Okay. Well, first thing you can do, you can just see when you get this, does it get that class?
I'm not surprised that's not. So it took two parameters, right? You have to have one, and then you have to have how many items you want. Is that right? See, that's the thing, I don't think I even,
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I don't think it's, is that oh, here?
Yeah, it's, he has me to lead class.
Right.
So,
I didn't.
Right.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a little clear.
Yeah, okay.
You're always like, can use something big.
9:30.
Ah, okay, it worked.
Yeah,
Yay.
so.
Oh, is it seated here?
Yeah. I mean, this is, this is. This is on the same.
I don't have to say it's for the.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Alright.
Now, if you're building, I think this is part obviously works, it's fun. If you're building like a foundation, right, they're gonna have like those all day, and adding,
There's no reason.
yeah, there's no reason around, you could probably just modify the range. Yeah. Either one works.
That actually, no, it does like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wait, do you get like the vanilla JavaScript, is that like, do you do all this stuff, like, or is it really, really hard? Is that something that's like worth learning, or is it just?
This garage.
So yeah, you can obviously do all these things here on JavaScript. It would be more verbose, certainly, to do anything very good object queries. Not necessarily hard, it would just be like more necessary.
Is there like good resources to see all the stuff that's available, like the reselector, like is there other ones?
As far as like selecting things from the DOM, or just
So
like
do you
equivalence.
yeah, I didn't know like, okay, like you change this class, like what, you know.
Yeah, so what it does is, what it gives you is the same as what, find, element is the actual DOM order, which is just a JavaScript object that has some properties. So you can't do the .css thing, that's jQuery, which you do .border equals, like you can't array. So the best resource for this, if you want to try to see how to do it, there's a style called, you might not use jQuery. I'm going to show you on the left, the jQuery, and on the right,
Yes.
So whenever you're doing the function, it's associated with an object.
Yes.
Okay.
Calling the wrong object. Usually calling to use it. Got it. Just letting them know.
I didn't know how to say that.
That makes sense. Got it.
Stupid X is very.
Right.
So space. Try adding something.
Oh, yes, like here's the shape. Maybe anything, you probably have an extra one towards the bottom.
Oh.
See you Tuesday. I got it.
Well, that's inside.
And then, I can explain.
Like just like
Yeah.
I think people break points and find out what our stress helps sometimes.
Like, just to check if something is actually running, if you put like a
You have found one.
thank you, and then put a message to resolve.
And then when you inspect it, just go to the console and to try clicking on something and then see.
Do you have experience in converting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, somebody's, worried about privacy.
I got some, probably installed.
All of those plugins. Yeah. They all block our tool set.
Yeah.
I just called mine.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. You have $1? I don't know. Yeah. It's never drove that it's normal.
Hey, Jacob, could you go ahead to a quick point in the console to see where your code is functioning?
No. They never did go there.
We need to make that too. I can't figure out why. So we have it.
Okay.
So we have to console log and see where it's like stopping.
Okay.
Or where it's
So, yeah, you could do two things. You could just add console logs, like in your function, and you could then just look at the console, see if it's there. If you want to use the bucket, it's very cool to get sources. And then you go to your JS folder, click on index, and then this middle window that's really small, that's the one that's okay. And you can find wherever your function is. Yeah. So it won't let you back on inside. And now if you delete something, you can see because it is that function. So never actually got inside that function. So the new function is being called. So let's look back at this guy exactly. That's right. So is this last one?
So,
In red, this one.
I say you
No, I'm not.
Am I missing? Anybody else?
Yeah, I don't really need to sit.
Yeah. We'll put some. Yeah.
Also, Jake, why don't you swing around?
Thanks for your help.
Yeah. Hold on.
It's a problem on line 3, so it was on that line, right? And we knew that because the doing to do function wasn't being called. We knew it had to be a problem with this. But it's not a problem with the class system. It's a problem with the other system. So the other CSS selector. Oh, wow.
Oh, thank you. Oh my God, I never got that.
Tons of arrows.
Thank you.
Even to be a lot.
Sometimes when you look at words over and over, they
Yeah,
stop, they start
that's
to
what
look silly, you know?
Let's go.
Thank you guys.
Sorry. I should have given that away.
Did you find it?
No, I should have, when I didn't see, I should have gone central.
Okay, so it makes me think that it's adding something, but whatever it's adding is in the right format.
Example is.
Let's take a look at the add function. So, what is it?
It's,
And what it's straight up, right? It's straight up. What are the other things in our? Exactly. What we need to do is we need to create an object. Okay, so it needs to look like other objects. So we don't need to change that one. What we need to do after that one, we need to use that input string, like just on the next one.
Since you don't have the good identifier, you just kind of whatever you want, it's okay.
We need
Yeah, I
to-
mean, I have like a 7 to midnight, but, it is. You wake up.
Exchange this first word, yeah.
And so if you,
That's all right. And how do we create an object? Well, that's a good. And then, what's the other objects that we have inside?
yourself?
not in the grading school.
We need to add that. So,
Sure.
so text, yeah, and what's the value? I feel like we should have a lot of time.
Yeah. Basic JavaScript.
Yeah.
And then
JavaScript.
we need another property. Yeah, that's right.
Maybe just add a That's the thing, if you do it in 2 different classes. Yeah. And that's 8 classes.
So we want to start off with.
Yes.
Then what are we gonna push on this array? Instead of.
Instead of press that stuff.
Some people make
Exactly.
just double it up. Say that.
So we're just creating an object, pushing that on instead of a string.
So, but I will get like if you're gonna take the JavaScript class, you want to be so
You get college, you get to turn 101.
Sure.
They don't change the country 305. You have to get to
So it's like, you know,
when you go to college, you have a list of required courses. So you're like, I don't want to there's all JavaScript. That's the problem.
Does it cost a lot to have all?
So they don't care.
pushing your. Oh, let's go back to that. Oh, yeah, after that, I have to do this. We want to do that.
Right.
Because they give you
Well, it was like updating, it was rendering before the state updated, so it was actually staff, that's why we're submitting, and then the next time, it was rendering the old state, and then.
Right.
Sweet.
You're
Out of the way. You're gonna get a lot of practice.
Yeah, I know.
Just getting hammered out the base. I think just. And then just, it's next class, actually.
Yeah.
It's like that basic, like, And then
we're doing it like that, it's basically
the next class
would
would.
that.
Yeah.
Sideways, what else?
You should try to make like delete or whatever.
Yeah, that's
That's what the solution, and then the reference to the solution, and also the homework is like. Build one from scratch.
Cool.
Yeah.
So with the project that I had, you know, keep the scope, but you kind of stay with the context. Because I've been so slammed with work that like usually all the time that I'm outside class, working in class, it's just like making sure I understand what you're covering.
Yeah.
Because that would be really good for like
Setups.
and then once we got into like the crowd, so like
Yeah.
meetings and a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So at the beginning it was like all the things I thought so just reinforcing. So I think that it's probably perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, hopefully we can map like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
To how you're doing that. Yeah.
And like at least in my context, my customers they will use it again until December. So I asked in December to like have built a Firebase, then you know reach out to my code base, Telegram, Express, but like all that.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Yeah.
pointing me in that direction and also kind of dig into this analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's good that we kind of flushed out plan A and B.
So and then now I have the code A.
Yeah.
That I can revisit after.
So,
I think that this is a great way to also like already like
yeah, yeah. It's a little longer.
No,
I think for a good reason.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important that we're focused on not just rushing ahead. Check boxes.
Yeah, that's the.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Yeah, or Monday, if you want to.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks. That was easy, eh?
Yeah. Would you recommend like this? I've been reading a lot, but I haven't realized like exactly like coding.
Yeah.
Like, I think I should probably.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, if like really reading class through, you still have a lot to go, and you still have a lot to figure out ready for the next concept. I recommend first, you know, just building stuff, just finding the way that, you know, adding extra features to the things that we do in class.
Just like need to know something.
I mean, that's a great way too, yeah. And, you know, if you need like ideas, you know, let me know. If you want best, you know, brainstorm.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, for me, like, I was saying something else says, for me, like, it helps when I'm still like learning on that, just like, you know, so I mess around, change things until I start reading. And then like reading is like reinforcement. Right? Once I finish that, maybe I understand these a little deeper and more completely, ties to the knots. But for me, you know, I like to just get an answer first. And then come back later.
Yeah, so I need to think the syntax is really getting.
Yeah.
Well, no, not so much. I think it's like just like staying aware of the code.
Mm-hmm.
Like after a while, after a while, it's like leaving comments on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like this is a new paradigm, right? Like a new architecture, this is MVC stuff, and this is sort of a whole new concept. But like once you see this pattern in every block, you know what I'm saying? Once you can see your mind, it's like, oh, okay, like this is updating the red, and that's causing this thing to be doing. That's absolutely it looks like this. And once you see the pattern over and over again, you'll start to get that context. So you can keep the whole complication in head.
Yeah.
But it's really normal not to be able to do that in the first of these.
So I feel like that. You don't even need to be in class. That's the case.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're all here.
I watched it. Actually, I didn't watch the video. I was listening to the video, but on Angular, like a little bit. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's like handlebars, right?
Well, there's part of it is like Angular is a full framework for the whole application. So Angular takes this very general MVC idea and standardizes it. It's like, do it this specific way. Here are some tools in order to do it in that way. So they have their own sort of implementation of MVC, but it's still that underlying, idea, model with the state and the controller that is, kind of coordinating your application and review that's responsible for the HTML and the UI.
Okay, so it just like breaks it up.
Yeah, the way to use that separation of concerns, and then it gives you tools to kind of standardize those things.
Okay.
So that once you see one thing that I'm you can function like almost immediately. So that's what it's
Makes it a lot easier.
I mean, once you're good at it, yeah. Obviously, like it's a high learning curve,
Yeah.
But once you've messed around with it a little bit, it does speed things up quite a bit.
See you next week.
Yeah. Depending on how this weekend goes, you can feel free to come to office hours. And,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to come in on Sunday.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sweet. See ya.
The fact that you know that is.